Good evening and welcome to our daily devotional reading. Let's try to take a deep breath. Just let the day wash away. Forget everything that you hoped and planned, that's maybe gone amiss. Forget everything that you hope and planned and worked out. There is no good or bad in the moment. There simply is. So just be. And let's listen to Plato. Stranger. Suppose that the nurslings of Kronos, having this boundless leisure, and the power of holding intercourse not only with men, but with the brute creation, had used all these advantages with a view to philosophy, conversing with the brutes as well as with one another, and learning of every nature which was gifted with any special power, and was able to contribute some special experience to the store of wisdom, there would be no difficulty in deciding that they would be 1,000 times happier than the men of our own day. Or again, if they had merely eaten and drunk until they were full, and told stories to one another and to the animals, such stories as are now attributed to them. In this case also, as I should imagine, the answer would be easy. But until some satisfactory witness can be found of the love of that age of knowledge and discussion, we had better let the matter drop, and give the reason why we have unearthed this tale, and then we shall be able to get on. In the fullness of time, when the change was to take place, and the earth-born race had all perished, and every soul had completed its proper cycle of births and been sown in the earth her appointed number of times, the pilot of the universe let the helm go, and retired to his place of view, and then fate and innate desire reversed the motion of the world. Then also all the inferior deities who share the rule of the supreme power, being informed of what was happening, let go of the parts of the world which were under their control, and the world turning round with a sudden shock, being impelled in an opposite direction from beginning to end, was shaken by a mighty earthquake, which wrought a new destruction of all manner of animals. Afterwards, when sufficient time had elapsed, the tumult and confusion and earthquake ceased, and the universal creature, once more at peace, attained to a calm, and settled down into his own orderly and accustomed course, having the charge and the rule of himself, and of all the creatures which are contained in him, and executing, as far as he remembered them, the instructions of his Father and Creator, more precisely at first, but afterwards with less exactness. The reason of the falling off was the admixture of matter in him. This was inherent in the primal nature, which was full of disorder, until attaining to the present order. From God the constructor, the world received all that is good in him, But from the previous state came elements of evil and unrighteousness, which thence derived, first of all passed into the world, and were then transmitted to the animals. While the world was aided by the pilot in nurturing the animals, the evil was small and great the good which he produced. But after the separation, when the world was let go, at first all proceeded well enough, but as time went on, there was more and more forgetting, and the old discord again held sway and burst forth in full glory, and at last small was the good, and great was the admixture of evil, and there was a danger of universal ruin to the world, and to the things contained in him. Wherefore God, the orderer of all, in his tender care, seeing that the world was in great straits, and fearing that all might be dissolved in the storm and disappear in infinite chaos, again seated himself at the helm, and bringing back the elements which had fallen into dissolution and disorder to the motion which had prevailed under his dispensation, he set them in order and restored them, and made the world imperishable and immortal. And this is the whole tale, of which the first part will suffice to illustrate the nature of the king. For when the world turned towards the present cycle of generation, the age of man again stood still, and a change opposite to the previous one was the result. The small creatures which had almost disappeared grew in stature, and the newly born children of the earth became grey and died and sank into the earth again. All things changed, imitating and following the condition of the universe, and of necessity agreeing with that in their mode of conception and generation and nurture. For no animal was any longer allowed to come into being in the earth through the agency of other creative beings. But as the world was ordained to be the lord of his own progress, in like manner the parts were ordained to grow and generate and give nourishment as far as they could of themselves, impelled by a similar movement. And so we have arrived at the real end of our discourse, for although there might be much to tell of the lower animals, and of the conditions out of which they changed, and of the causes of the change, about men there is not much, and that little is more to the purpose. Deprived of the care of God, who had possessed and tended them, they were left helpless and defenseless, and were torn in pieces by the beasts, who were naturally fierce and had now grown wild. And in the first ages they were still without skill or resource. The food which once grew spontaneously had failed, and as yet they knew not how to procure it, because they had never felt the pressure of necessity. For all these reasons they were in a great strait. Therefore also the gifts spoken of in the old tradition were imparted to man by the gods, together with so much teaching and education as was indispensable. Fire was given to them by Prometheus, the arts by Hephaestus, and his fellow worker Athena, seeds and plants by others. From these is derived all that has helped to frame human life: fire, arts, seeds and plants. Since the care of the gods, as I was saying, had now failed men, and they had to order their course of life for themselves, and were their own masters, just like the universal creature whom they imitate and follow, ever changing as he changes, and ever living and growing, at one time in one manner and at another time in another. enough of the story which may be of use in showing us how greatly we erred in the delineation of the king and the statesman in our previous discourse. Young Socrates. What was the great error of which you speak? Stranger. There were two. The first a lesser one, the other was an error of much larger and grander scale. What do you mean? I mean to say that when we were asked about a king and statesman of the present cycle and generation, we told of a shepherd of a human flock who belonged to the other cycle, and of one who was a god when he ought to have been a man. And this is a great error. Again, we declared him to be the ruler of the entire state, without explaining how. This was not the whole truth, nor very intelligible. But still it was true, and therefore the second error was not so great as the first. Very good. Before we can expect to have a perfect description of the statesman, we must define the nature of his office. Certainly. And the myth was introduced in order to show not only that all others are rivals of the true shepherd who is the subject of our search, but in order that we might have a clearer view of him who is alone worthy to receive this appellation, because he alone of shepherds and herdsmen, according to the image which we have employed, has the care of human beings. Very true. And I cannot help thinking, Socrates, that the form of the divine shepherd is even higher than that of the king, whereas the statesmen who are now on earth seem to be much more like their subjects in character, and much more nearly to partake of their breeding and education. Certainly. Still, they must be investigated all the same, to see whether, like the divine shepherd, they are above their subjects on a level with them, or on a level with them. Of course. Do you remember that we spoke of a command for self exercised over animals, not singly but collectively, which we called the art of rearing a herd? Yes, I remember. There somewhere lay our error, for we never included or mentioned the statesman, and we did not observe that he had no place in our nomenclature. How was that? All other herdsmen rear their herds, but this is not a suitable term to apply to the statesman. We should use a name which is common to them all. True, if there be such a name. Why is not care of herds applicable to all? For this implies no feeding or any special duty. If we say either tending the herd or managing the herd or having the care of them, the same word will include all, and then we may wrap up the statesman with the rest, as the argument seems to require. Quite right, but how shall we take the next step in the division? As before, we divided the art of rearing herds accordingly as they were land or water herds, winged or wingless, mixing or not mixing the breed, horned and hornless. So we may divide by these same differences the tending of herds, comprehending in our definition the kingship of today and the rule of Chronos. That is clear, but I still ask, what is to follow? Thus far our scripture of the evening. I'm looking at maps of meaning. I spoke of it yesterday and hinted that I didn't buy it, which I didn't at the time, but I did later. The story of how I came to possess this particular copy of Maps of Meaning is the weirdest story of a very weird life. Too weird for YouTube even. If you really want to know the story of how I came to possess this copy of Maps of Meaning, then if we ever meet again in person, ask me. Then maybe lean in. And I will whisper in your ear. If you promise that you will forget immediately and you won't run away in fear. Stranger things than can be dreamt of. So, the unexamined life is apparently not worth living, even if you are living in paradise. That is what I got from the first words of the stranger. And from the rest, since in the present age, the age of man, since the elves left us and the dwarfs no longer come from their minds, life's a bitch and then you die. That is what this story seems to say. And there's no Aragon. Or is there? Of course, one has to think of the Republic and the laws where Plato delineates, is that a word? The rearing of the rightful kings, how they should be educated and how one is to recognize them. I am curious what he will say in this. I hope you have a good night's rest. May the spirit of Sophia be with you.